any of the politics. Well, Somalia basically has got two major ethnic groups. The one are the pastorals, who are in power and have been since 1960, and the other are the Bantu. And so the Somalians that you have in this country are mostly from the Bantu tribe. And it's almost 9 provinces. But, I mean, and it's a classic apartheid state. Don't just think that South Africa is the pariah of the world for having imagined this. You understand? And the Bantu are completely marginalized. Marginalized economically, their children are not educated. So I've had some dealings with them, and one of the critical things that we're trying to look at is, besides looking at maybe a way of negotiating a different narrative for Somalia, is can't you do just something to begin to help our children to be educated? Now you can imagine most of Somalia is Muslim, coming to a Christian minister asking for help. You know, it is bizarre. But to come to your thing, apartheid basically demolished the future of 80% of our community. You understand? And the ripple effect of that stuff still sits with us. You know? Let me be honest with you. It's a hell of a struggle for white people to get over what has been put in there for years. And no matter how much, somebody might say to me, you're a racist. If I react to that angrily, then I must know that I am a racist. I've got some cockroaches crawling around in my shoes that I haven't yet managed to sort out properly yet. And when I see black people, there is a little sign that goes up. Nobody would recognize it. Nobody would know it, especially somebody who's been in the church for so long. But boy, we learn to smile in one another's faces. Be with me. So one has to recognize that we bring with us a legacy that, it is fascinating that the Dutch Reformed Church, which really theologically supported and gave a mandate to apartheid, in actual fact has moved light years from there, because their repentance has been so much easier. The Methodist Church, which declared that it was one and undivided in 1958, is still struggling with the most vicious racism, because we just will not admit it. And I think that, some of the stuff you might not know that goes on in the politics of the church is pernicious. But because we said in 1958 that we were one and undivided, and we waltzed through, I was the first white that was placed beside the missionaries in a black circuit in 1987. I moved in there. You with me? And it wasn't a huge disgrace or a huge thing. It was one of the most privileged things that the church could have done for me. Because the church actually said in 1987, it doesn't actually matter what the policy of the land, you will go there. And what I learned, I kind of went on a learning curve like this, and I'd finished all my studies apparently. Does that make sense to you? And still, the privilege of being able to learn from the other. And let me say, when we're talking about inequality, can I dare to say to you, instead of seeing it as a judgmental challenge, whatever it is, if we can begin to start reframing it in our minds as an opportunity of exploring our humanity, different dimensions of our humanity, I'm telling you, very often, I think that the most privileged place for me to be is amongst the poorest of the poor. And if we're going to see it as a threat, we're going to be caught. If we begin to start thinking that people who have got to really measure every little thing that they have for their sake and their families, we begin to start prizing open a door that can begin to start enabling us to understand ourselves better. And I'm not saying it in a paternalistic way, because if you're going to look after the poor, feeling sorry for them, it's another thing like the Christmas present. You know? Dependency and entitlement amongst the poor is the most profound insult. Let me give you this little bit of money that I've got over here. Oh, I feel so good about that. And what do you feel?
I dare not say.
Yeah, no. You'd like to tell me to take my money and shove it if you could. It was interesting this last week. There was a program that was run at the center, and one of the young people there did some cooking for the organizer, and she gave him 200 rand for it, and he thinks he's worth much more than that. And he did cook a beautiful meal for them and the rest of it. So he said to me, I'm going to take her money and I'm going to give it back to her. She can shove it where she wants it, because she has treated me like a poor black. You know what it feels like to be a poor white, and for the family to come around you feeling sorry. You know, they can't converse with you on any level of humanity at all. Black people, strangely enough, have got the same kind of idea about their humanity. And if you have been poor, if you've ever known what poverty is, you will know what I'm talking about. My mother was the youngest of 9, and she, her father thought it was because she was so pretty she didn't need education. So he sent her to school at the age of 9, and then the family kind of collapsed, so she got to standard 6. I think she was a very clever woman. She was the first woman to be a manager in this permanent building society. So, and she was very, very astute. You with me? With her standard 6 education. But in actually, and then she decided the one thing that they would never take away from me was an education. So she sent me to St. Stithians College. I mean, she must have had rocks in her head, you know. And I waltzed through St. Stithians College with all the trauma of separation from the family and all the rest of it. And you know, it was only when I was bishop of that district and I went to the council meetings at St. Stithians and I started looking at the calculations of what it cost her, that I thought, glory, how did this woman cope? When she retired in 1978, and thank heaven she died at the beginning of 1979, her pension was 79 rand a month. But I never suspected that we were as poor as we were. My brother-in-law once said to her, Ruthie, we want to build this nice house, and the only condition we'll build it is if you and Paul come and live with us. And my mother said to him, Willie, never. I will remain independent. Thank you. Very sweet thought, but thank you. And believe it or not, poor people are like that. They have a deep sense of the only thing that they have is the knowledge that they are made in the image of God, even if they're in rags. And that just to some kind of response, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I mean, if you see
how many people live there in squalor. It is actually frightening. And I said to him one day, Danny, how come there's all this xenophobia and you're burning the shops? He says, no, that's the black South Africans that are too lazy to work. Then they accuse these guys of taking their jobs, but they've done nothing about setting up their own spaza shops. And you learn from that. I mean, my uncle had his farm taken from him in Zimbabwe. He used to put aside on his farm 3 hectares. He'd plow it. He'd say to them, I want 20 then Zimbabwe dollars, not US dollars, to cover the fertilizer. The fuel, the hours, the wages he paid for. Those crops were given to his staff. I mean, those farmers down in the Larrabel and all that area could do exactly the same. And they would be feeding the starving. Pretoria, Tshwane, grows by 1 million people a year. How do you put them in houses? How do you get water to them? How do you educate them? We have 168 informal settlements around the Tshwane area. The council can help 3 of them. And then if you look at it, it starts at central government, provincial government, down to the council, that have sat and done nothing for years. And we have starving people in this country, millions of them. Now the land claim is to so-called give those people land to stop them starving. How are you going to stop them starving? If they've got no access to money, they cannot even buy the maize to plant to grow their own food. We sit with big problems.
Now there are 20 million people who go to bed at night hungry. Are you with me? And so you raise a whole question of how do we manage moving the assets that we have in a way that gives dignity to all people, you know? And it's there isn't a simple answer, but I do want to tell you this. When we begin to start talking together like this, in a group like this, I happen to think that the church is one of the most hopeful places in society. Because you think of who comes through these doors every Sunday. Just think of it. Think of the connections. You with me? For one. Think of the intellect, the combined intellect. And then one just takes one of the issues that you've raised. Let's look at the issue of informal settlements, you know, which is a phenomenon. There isn't a single town in South Africa that does not have an informal settlement. Now, I went and observed the elections in Zimbabwe, okay? And Zimbabwe's got very high levels of poverty, very high. And part of the poverty in Zimbabwe is similar to some of the reasons that we've got the poverty. But will you believe me if I tell you that I did not see one informal settlement? Not one shack. Now there must be something in Zimbabwe that can teach us. And you would be surprised that in a church like Westview, you've got people who have an ability to imagine alternatives. And so you begin to start putting something like that together because we're concerned about the inequality, because it contradicts our faith. It makes our faith impotent. You with me? And how do we then begin to start, first of all, imagining something different? And secondly, how do we plan it? And then thirdly, how do we get it onto the implementation level? Now, I do want to tell you, I think that there are people in a community like this who can do that kind of thing, you know? But it does mean, with due respect, that you've got to start imagining church in another way. So you have your time of worship, and after the time of worship, you have a planning committee that begins to start taking seriously what you can deal with in this area. You know, that secures people's dignity, that begins to start making an inroad into another place. Those people that came and stayed in Central Methodist knew one thing. This is not your destination, and you don't sit here Googling nothing all day. You will be out of the building at 8 o'clock because you need to try and get yourself integrated into this country with a job and wherever you go. And you go into Johannesburg and 90% of your restaurants are people by Zimbabweans. You with me? Now, and it was remarkable eventually. We had training in sewing, in embroidery, in woodwork, in metalwork, in computers, in computer repairs, and they used to come every Friday night and they used to report on where their programs were going. Now, it wasn't the solution to everything. And in the end, when they were so many of them were evicted into squalor. But the church holds so much potential. You know, and particularly, I'm sorry to say, but I'm sure it's true about other denominations, but the Methodist Church organizes very carefully and very well. It's not pie in the sky when you die, you know. It will ask relevant questions. But I sense that we're a congregation that congregates and congregates and congregates. And I don't know your congregation, so you must know what I'm looking at from outside, you know. And one of the signs of being psychologically challenged, let me put it that way, is that you've got no imagination. You wanting to say, you know.
One of the biggest inequalities I think we've got is in the earning amount and wages. I'll give you a very good example. Painters around here are charging 250, 300 rand a day. I went to the dentist and after 15 minutes I got a bill for 1,200 rand.
You're lucky.
You add that up. Well, you know, how do you...
Yeah. So you see, I think that
to me is huge.
But that's the question that needs to be asked. Now, you must come to where I am, you know. Now, we've got about 150 people living on the property. So let me be blunt with you. We've constantly got problems with electricity, and we've constantly got problems with sanitation. Heaven only knows what people imagine putting down toilets. You with me? So we get the professionals in, and the professionals say, this is going to cost you 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 to fix. All right? So I say to one of the people that I know is connected into the community, can you get somebody to please come in here and fix it? They come in, they spend a day, 250 rand. You with me? Now, you see, somehow that conversation can take place in a church. You're not going to get that through a council. You understand? And that's why our connectedness and our intelligence. Let me say to you, your political parties don't have the connections that you have. You're right on the ground. Nobody can tell you stuff about your place. That's nonsense. You know. You know. So you have two things that are powerful. First of all, you know this. I bet you know this place better than the councillor, who makes decisions up there about what happens down here. I bet you have a political power to be able to mobilize amongst one another much better than your councillor. I'm sorry to say that, but that's the truth. You with me? So just in terms of your politics, you are far more qualified. And you need to recognize that. You're not stupid. You have good interpretive skills. You have a way of organizing. I mean, where on what's today, Wednesday? Where on a Wednesday do you get more than 30 people into a room to start talking about the real issues that are being faced? But please don't just leave here and leave it. And you've got to recognize that the people who make the changes, I'm sorry to have to say to you, at this level are not the politicians. It's people like yourselves. But make no error, you've got to do it carefully. You're not going to change the paradigm by dreaming about it in a church hall. You can come back to the church hall and then put specifics in place. What is one thing in this area that emerges as the most critical issue we've got to look at? You raise it. Is it in education with the children? Is it, because that is a huge issue in this country at the moment, the quality of education right across the board. Our children are coming out of school, they don't know how to think, let alone read. So they don't have a critical mindset, they have a Baba black sheep mindset. You understand? Now, you wanted to ask a question.
Yes, my question is now squeezing in amongst everything that you've said. Are we as a church, is our perception of inequality and what we're talking about? We're talking about the slaves and the slave owners, the poor and the rich all coming to church together. Is it the same inequality as what the masses are talking about? Should we not be doing something different and not saying, welcome everybody into church? That doesn't help them, apart from, I'm saying, making them feel good by coming to church. Is there not something else we can do, as you are now saying, help them here, do this? Can we have not something definite that can be done?
I mean, I think that your question is your answer. So one of the things you're saying is that equality comes on different levels.
Yes,
you know?
Everybody wants money. Everybody wants a position, but they're not qualified for it. I would love to get the money of a surgeon. I'd love to get the money of the dentist that the man was talking about. I'm not qualified to be a dentist. I would not be capable of that position. But I was happy with the position that I was in life. Can these people now not be so demanding for a job at this height, when actually they could get enough money to live at a job there without disrupting everybody?
You see, one of the things that you're talking about is the whole issue of class. You with me? And I don't want to answer your question because I think the intricacy of the question opens up all sorts of things. Many of you in this place are retired. Now, I'm retired, believe it or not. And I want to tell you, I think retirement is a load of hogwash. And I tell you why. Because as people reach the point in which they have had life experience, they've had to take their academic knowledge, whether it is in a simple job or in a very fancy job as a dentist, okay? And by the way, dentists suffer more from depression than any other profession. Let me just say, what you're raising is the fact that We cannot have a society where people are irrelevant. The dentist has got to recognize that the plumber is as important as her fiddling around in teeth. And so there needs to be that kind of adjustment in our thinking. But you can only say that kind of thing in a church, where, as your society steward, you may have a plumber. But you're not going to put a doctor in there, because the doctor isn't good at leadership. He's good at fiddling around with body parts, but he's useless in his people skills. But the plumber has to work with people for his life. And so he's a good leader in the church. And so what really is a sort of much lower grade profession, in actual fact, is critical. So you understand, and it's as one begins in a place like this, and as you start recognizing that as so-called retired people, you're actually not like a preservative on a shelf, waiting to be embalmed in a stomach. And then I won't take you through the rest of the process. You understand? But in actual fact, and that does not mean that we don't take young people seriously. Not at all. In actual fact, if that's what you think, you're stupid. And if you also think that young people have got no wisdom, you're also stupid. But it does mean that you're not stupid. And it does mean that you're not irrelevant. And it does mean that at times you've got to get off your rear end and get moving, so that when you leave this mortal frame, you have 2 more talents to bring to the Lord. Instead of, I was retired, I had 1 talent, so I sat on it for the rest of my life. And here it is.